The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Catherine stood at the grand window, her fingers trembling against the cold glass. She had been awake since dawn, unable to shake the heavy feeling that had settled in her chest 3 days ago when the news arrived. The phone call that changed everything came at exactly 11:47 p.m., interrupting their quiet evening together. William had answered with his usual composed voice, but Catherine watched his face transform as he listened to the urgent words on the other end. His jaw tightened, his eyes widened, and for a moment that felt like hours, he simply stood frozen. When he finally ended the call, the silence between them spoke louder than any words could. "We need to talk," he had whispered, and those 4 simple words sent chills down her spine. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of hushed conversations, emergency meetings, and sleepless nights. Palace staff moved with unusual urgency, their faces grave and voices lowered to whispers. Catherine noticed how the normal cheerful chatter in the hallways had been replaced by an almost funeral-like quiet. Now, as she gazed out at the familiar gardens where their children often played, Catherine tried to memorize every detail. The way the morning light danced on the fountain, the sound of birds singing in the ancient oak trees, the smell of fresh roses that drifted through the slightly open window. These moments, she realized, were precious beyond measure. Behind her, she could hear William pacing in their private study. His footsteps had become a constant rhythm over the past few days, back and forth across the Persian rug that had been a wedding gift from her grandmother. He was struggling with a decision that would affect not just their family, but millions of people who looked up to them. The weight of duty had always been present in their lives, but never had it felt so crushing. Catherine remembered their wedding day, how hopeful and bright the future had seemed. The crowds cheering, the bells ringing, the promise of a lifetime together serving their country and their people. They had known challenges would come, but nothing could have prepared them for this moment. She turned from the window as William's pacing stopped. Through the doorway, she could see him standing at his desk, staring down at the official documents that had arrived that morning. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion and the burden of choice. She wanted to go to him, to wrap her arms around him and tell him everything would be all right. But she knew that would be a lie. The children were still asleep in their rooms, blissfully unaware that their world was about to change forever. Catherine had spent extra time tucking them in the night before, reading an extra story, singing one more lullaby. George had asked why Mama seemed sad, and she had forced a smile, telling him she was just tired. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Their private secretary entered quietly, carrying yet another stack of papers that required immediate attention. Catherine watched as William straightened his shoulders, putting on the mask of composure that had been trained into him since childhood. But she could see through it, could see the pain he was trying so hard to hide. The decision had to be made today. There was no more time for consideration, no more room for hope that another solution might present itself. The events of the past week had set things in motion that could not be stopped or reversed. William had tried everything, had consulted with advisors, family members, and close friends, but every path led to the same inevitable conclusion. Catherine moved away from the window and walked slowly toward the study. Each step felt heavy, as if she was walking through deep water. She paused in the doorway, watching her husband's familiar silhouette against the morning light. They had been through so much together, had weathered storms that would have broken other couples, but this felt different. This felt final. "The car will be ready in an hour," William said quietly without turning around. His voice was steady, but Catherine could hear the undercurrent of emotion he was fighting to control. She nodded even though he couldn't see her. An hour to say goodbye to the life they had built together, to the roles they had embraced with such dedication, to the future they had planned with such care. An hour to prepare for a farewell that would echo through history and touch the hearts of people around the world who had watched their love story unfold. The news had broken exactly 7 days earlier, spreading across the globe faster than wildfire. Catherine remembered sitting in their private living room, watching the breaking news alerts flash across every television channel, every news website, every social media platform. The headlines were brutal in their simplicity, yet devastating in their implications. It had started with a routine medical examination, something William had postponed twice due to his busy schedule. Catherine had practically forced him to go, worried about the persistent headaches he had been experiencing for weeks. He had laughed off her concerns, joking that it was probably just the stress of recent royal duties and the children's endless energy. But the doctors had found something that changed everything. The specialist had used careful, clinical language, speaking in measured tones about procedures and timelines, about treatment options and realistic expectations. William had sat perfectly still during the entire consultation, his training as a future king evident in his composed demeanor. But Catherine had watched his hands, had noticed how they gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles turned white. The drive home from the hospital had been silent except for the steady rhythm of rain against the car windows. Neither of them had spoken about what they had just heard, as if saying the words aloud might make them more real. It wasn't until they were safely behind the closed doors of their private quarters that the full weight of the news hit them. Catherine found herself remembering fragments of that conversation now, as she prepared for what might be their last public appearance together. William's voice had been steady as he explained what the doctors had told him, but his eyes had betrayed the fear he was trying so hard to conceal. The medical terms seemed foreign and frightening. Aggressive timeline, experimental treatments, uncertain outcomes. "We need to tell the children first," he had said, and Catherine had felt her heart break at the thought of trying to explain this to George. Charlotte and Louis. How do you tell children that their father, their hero, might not have much time left? How do you maintain hope while being honest about reality? The palace communications team had worked around the clock to craft the official statement. Every word had been carefully chosen, every sentence scrutinized for its potential impact on the nation and the Commonwealth. But behind all the formal language and royal protocol was a simple, heartbreaking truth. Time was running out. Catherine had watched William struggle with the decision of whether to step back from his duties immediately or continue serving for as long as possible. The doctors had been clear about the timeline, about the importance of beginning treatment as soon as possible, but William's sense of duty ran deeper than his concern for his own health. The people need stability, he had argued during one of their late-night conversations. They need to know that the institution will continue, that there's still something they can count on. But Catherine had seen the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he had to rest more frequently during official engagements, the carefully hidden moments when pain flickered across his features. She had become expert at reading the subtle signs that others missed, at knowing when he needed to sit down or when they needed to cut an event short. The decision to make the announcement had been agonizing. They had consulted with senior members of the royal family, with government officials, with their closest advisors. Everyone had opinions about timing, about wording, about the potential impact on the monarchy itself. But in the end, it came down to a simple truth. The people deserved to know. Catherine had been by William's side when they recorded the announcement that would be broadcast to the nation and the Commonwealth. She had watched him transform before her eyes, becoming the king the country needed him to be even as his world crumbled around him. His voice had been clear and strong as he spoke about duty, about service, about the love he and Catherine shared for their country and its people. But it was the moments after the cameras stopped rolling that haunted her now. The way William had collapsed into his chair, the facade finally dropping to reveal the frightened man beneath the royal composure. The way he had reached for her hand and held it so tightly that her fingers went numb. The whispered words that only she had heard. "I'm not ready to leave you. I'm not ready to leave them." The public reaction had been overwhelming. Flowers began appearing outside palace gates within hours of the announcement. Letters and cards poured in from around the world. Vigils were held in cities across the Commonwealth. The outpouring of love and support was both comforting and heartbreaking, a reminder of how deeply William and Catherine had touched the lives of people they would never meet. Now, as Catherine prepared for what the media was already calling their final official engagement together, she could hear the crowds gathering outside, the sound of their voices. Thousands of people who had come to show their support drifted through the palace walls like a gentle tide of love and sorrow. The children's voices echoed through the corridors as Catherine made her way to the family breakfast room. George's laughter mixed with Charlotte's gentle scolding of Louis for dropping his toast, creating a symphony of normalcy that felt both precious and painful. These ordinary moments had become extraordinary in light of recent events, each one to be treasured and remembered. Catherine paused outside the breakfast room door, steadying herself before entering. She had become skilled at wearing a mask of calm strength for her children, but some mornings it felt heavier than others. Today was one of those mornings. Through the doorway, she could see William already seated at the table, helping Louis with his cereal while George told an animated story about something he had learned in his lessons the day before. The sight of her family together, the morning light streaming through the tall windows, the simple domesticity of breakfast time, it all felt surreal given what lay ahead. In a few hours, they would step out into the public eye for what many believed would be their final official appearance as a complete family. But for now, in this moment, they were just parents trying to give their children a sense of security and love. "Mama," Charlotte's voice broke through her thoughts as her daughter noticed her in the doorway. "Papa says we're going on a special outing today. Will there be horses?" Catherine smiled, moving to kiss the top of Charlotte's head before taking her place at the table. She exchanged a meaningful look with William over their daughter's head. They had decided to frame today's events as a special family outing, a celebration rather than a goodbye. The children were too young to understand the full weight of what was happening, but they sensed the underlying tension that had filled their home for the past week. "There might be horses," William said gently, his voice carrying that special warmth he reserved for his children. "And there will definitely be lots of people who want to see you all." George, now 8 and beginning to understand more about his family's unique position in the world, looked up from his breakfast with serious eyes that reminded Catherine so much of his father. "Will the people be sad, Papa?" The question hung in the air for a moment, and Catherine watched William search for the right words. "How do you explain to a child that sometimes the people we love most have to face difficult times? How do you maintain innocence while preparing them for reality?" "Some people might be sad," William said carefully, reaching over to touch his son's shoulder. "But they'll also be happy to see us, to show us how much they care about our family. Sometimes people show their love in different ways." Charlotte, always the most perceptive of their children despite her young age, seemed to sense the deeper currents of emotion around her. She climbed down from her chair and moved to William's side, wrapping her small arms around his neck in a spontaneous hug that made Catherine's breath catch in her throat. "I love you, Papa," Charlotte whispered, and Catherine saw William's eyes fill with tears that he quickly blinked away. "I love you too, my darling girl," he whispered back, his voice thick with emotion, more than all the stars in the sky. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of their nanny, who had come to help the children prepare for the day ahead. Catherine watched as her 3 precious ones were gently guided upstairs to get dressed in their carefully chosen outfits. Each piece of clothing had been selected with thought and care, understanding that these images would be studied and remembered for years to come. Alone now in the breakfast room, Catherine and William sat in comfortable silence for a few moments. The weight of unspoken words filled the space between them. There was so much they wanted to say, so much they needed to share, but somehow the simple act of being together in this familiar space said it all. "Are you ready for this?" William asked quietly, reaching across the table to take her hand. Catherine squeezed his fingers gently. "I don't think anyone could ever be ready for this," she replied honestly, "but we'll get through it together the way we always have." William nodded, drawing strength from her words as he had so many times before. Their partnership had always been their greatest asset, the foundation that had allowed them to weather every storm that royal life had thrown their way. Today would be the ultimate test of that bond. The sound of helicopters overhead reminded them that the world was watching, waiting. News crews had been positioned outside the palace gates since dawn, and Catherine knew that every gesture, every expression, every moment of today would be captured and analyzed. The responsibility felt overwhelming, but she also understood the importance of what they were doing. "The staff wants to say goodbye," William mentioned, glancing toward the door where their household team had been gathering throughout the morning. Catherine nodded. These people had become like family over the years, caring for their home, protecting their privacy, and supporting them through countless royal duties. They deserved their own moment of farewell, their own chance to express what this family had meant to them. As they rose from the table, Catherine caught sight of their reflection in the antique mirror that hung on the far wall. For just a moment she saw them as the outside world did. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, future King and Queen, symbols of continuity and tradition. But then she blinked and saw only William and Catherine, husband and wife, facing the most difficult day of their lives with love as their guide. The Great Hall of Kensington Palace had never felt so intimate despite its grand proportions. One by one, members of their household staff filed in, each carrying the weight of years of shared service and genuine affection. Catherine watched as faces she had come to know and trust gathered in a semicircle, their usual professional composure softened by visible emotion. Maria, their head housekeeper who had been with the family since George's birth, stepped forward first. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she spoke, her voice carrying the warm Spanish accent that had become so familiar in their daily lives. "Your Royal Highnesses," she began, then paused, shaking her head with a small smile. "William and Catherine," she corrected herself, using their given names as she did when they were in private. "In all my years of service, I have never had the privilege of caring for a family that felt so much like my own family." Catherine felt her composure begin to crack as Maria continued, sharing memories of late-night conversations in the kitchen when Catherine couldn't sleep during her pregnancies, of William sneaking down for midnight snacks and always asking about her grandchildren in Spain, of the countless small moments that had woven them all together into something more than employer and employee. James, their private secretary who had managed their schedules and correspondence with quiet efficiency for nearly a decade, cleared his throat before speaking. His usual brisk professional manner was replaced by something more vulnerable and human. "You have taught me," he said, his voice steadier than his hands, "that true leadership isn't about commanding from above but about serving from alongside. You've shown dignity in every situation, grace under impossible pressure, and kindness to everyone who crosses your path." Catherine glanced at William and saw him struggling to maintain his composure as James continued. The formal distance that usually existed between royals and their staff had dissolved completely in this moment, replaced by genuine human connection and mutual respect. One by one, others shared their thoughts. Sarah, the children's nanny, spoke through tears about watching George, Charlotte, and Louis grow into kind, compassionate children who treated everyone with respect regardless of their position. The palace chef, a gruff man who rarely showed emotion, wiped his eyes as he recalled special birthday dinners and the way William always complimented his cooking, even when royal protocols dictated formality. The palace groundskeeper, who had worked on these gardens for 30 years, presented Catherine with a small potted rose cutting from the garden where she often walked when she needed quiet moments to think. "So you can take a piece of home with you wherever you go," he said simply, and Catherine accepted the gift with hands that shook with gratitude. But it was Thomas, their head of security, whose words hit the deepest. This man had literally put his life on the line for their family countless times, had been present for every major milestone, every public appearance, every private moment of vulnerability. He had seen them at their best and their most human, and his loyalty had never wavered. "You gave me the honor of protecting not just royals, but a real family," Thomas said, his usually stern expression soft with emotion. "I've watched you navigate impossible pressures while never losing sight of what matters most. I've seen you choose love over protocol, compassion over convenience, service over self-interest. It has been the greatest privilege of my career to serve alongside you." William stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion as he addressed the group. "You have been more than staff," he said. "You have been friends, advisors, and extended family. You have kept our secrets, shared our joys, and supported us through our darkest moments. There are no words adequate to express our gratitude." Catherine joined him, her own voice barely steady. "You have made our house a home," she said. "You have helped us raise our children with love and normalcy, despite the extraordinary circumstances of our lives. You have given us the gift of feeling ordinary in the most extraordinary of situations." The emotional gathering was interrupted by a gentle knock at the door. Their equerry entered quietly, his face apologetic but his message clear. It was time to prepare for departure. The outside world was waiting, and duty called once more. As the staff began to disperse, each stopping for personal goodbyes with both William and Catherine, the reality of finality settled over the room like morning mist. These people who had shared their daily lives for so many years would continue their service to the royal household. But this chapter of their shared story was ending. Maria was the last to leave, pressing a small wrapped package into Catherine's hands. "Recipes," she whispered. "All the children's favorites. So wherever you are, you can still make them taste like home." Catherine clutched the package to her chest, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness and love behind the gesture. As the great hall emptied, leaving only William and herself, she realized that this goodbye had been as difficult as any they would face today. These people had seen them not as symbols or titles, but as human beings worthy of love and devotion. "They'll never know how much they meant to us," William said quietly, his voice echoing slightly in the now empty hall. Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Outside, she could hear the sound of cars arriving, the subtle increase in activity that signaled their departure was imminent. Soon they would step out into the public eye, where every gesture would be scrutinized and every emotion analyzed. But this private moment of goodbye, witnessed only by those who had shared their most intimate daily lives, felt like the most honest farewell of all. The children appeared at the top of the grand staircase like three small angels, dressed in their carefully coordinated outfits that struck the perfect balance between formality and childhood innocence. George wore a navy blazer that made him look remarkably grown up, while Charlotte's powder blue dress brought out her sparkling eyes. Little Louis, still young enough to be unaware of the gravity of the situation, bounced slightly on his toes with excitement about the special outing they had promised him. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she watched them descend the stairs, their small hands trailing along the polished banister that had been touched by generations of royals before them. These three beautiful children, with their father's eyes and their mother's gentle spirit, represented everything precious and hopeful about the future. Today they would step into the public eye not just as young royals, but as symbols of resilience and love. "Are we really going to see all those people, Mama?" Charlotte asked as she reached the bottom of the stairs, her voice a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Yes, darling," Catherine replied, kneeling down to adjust Charlotte's dress and smooth George's hair. "There are many people who want to see our family, who want to show us how much they care about us." George, with the serious demeanor that seemed to come naturally to him, looked directly at his father. "Papa, will you be all right with all those people watching?" The question, asked with such innocent concern, nearly broke William's composure. He knelt down to George's level, placing gentle hands on his son's shoulders. "I'll be fine," he said softly, "because I'll have the three most important people in the world right beside me." Louis, not to be left out of the conversation, tugged on Catherine's dress. "Will there be cake?" he asked hopefully, causing both his parents to laugh despite the emotional weight of the moment. "There might be cake later," Catherine promised, lifting him into her arms for a moment before setting him back down. "But first we're going to take a very special walk, and everyone is going to want to take pictures of us." The family photographer, who had been discreetly waiting in the shadows, stepped forward for what everyone knew would be their final formal family portrait in these surroundings. The sitting was brief but poignant, capturing not just their image but the love that bound them together. William and Catherine, flanked by their three children, standing in the same spot where countless royal family portraits had been taken over the decades. As they prepared to leave their private quarters for the last time, Catherine noticed William pause at the doorway, looking back at the rooms that had been their sanctuary for so many years. These walls had witnessed their private conversations, their children's laughter, their quiet moments of happiness, and their recent moments of profound sadness. This had been more than a residence. It had been the place where they had built their family and their life together. "Ready?" their lead protection officer asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of understanding about what this day meant to all of them. William nodded, taking Catherine's hand while she held Louis's small fingers in her other hand. George and Charlotte flanked them, the family forming a unit that had faced every challenge together, and would face this final public appearance the same way. The walk from their private quarters to the waiting cars felt both endless and far too short. Palace staff lined the corridors, many of them wiping away tears as the family passed. These were people who had watched the children grow, who had served breakfast on Christmas mornings and helped organize birthday parties. Their faces reflected the same mixture of love, pride, and heartbreak that the entire nation was feeling. As they approached the main entrance, the sound from outside grew louder. Thousands of voices, some calling out words of encouragement, others simply clapping or cheering. The crowd had been gathering since dawn. People from all walks of life who had come to show their support and love for this family that had captured their hearts over the years. Catherine squeezed William's hand as they paused just inside the massive doors that would open, to reveal them to the waiting world. In a few moments, they would step out into the bright daylight, into the view of thousands of people and millions more watching around the world. Every step they took from this point forward would be recorded, analyzed, and remembered. "Remember," William whispered to the children, his voice gentle but firm. "Smile and wave. These people love you and they want to see that you're happy." George nodded solemnly, understanding more than his siblings about the importance of this moment. Charlotte reached for her mother's hand, while Louis simply looked excited about all the attention they were about to receive. The doors began to open, and bright sunlight streamed in, along with the overwhelming sound of the crowd. Catherine took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to step out into history. This was their moment, their chance to show the world that love and dignity could triumph even in the face of the most difficult circumstances. As they moved toward the threshold, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for the years they had been given, for the love they had shared, for the beautiful children who walked beside them, and for the opportunity to serve something greater than themselves. Whatever came next, they had lived fully and loved completely, and that knowledge would carry them through whatever lay ahead. The roar of the crowd hit them like a wave as they stepped into the sunlight. Thousands upon thousands of people stretched as far as the eye could see, filling every available space along the carefully planned route. Union Jack flags fluttered in the gentle breeze alongside flowers. Handmade signs and photographs of the family held high by supporters who had traveled from across the Commonwealth to be here for this moment. Catherine felt momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer volume of love and emotion directed toward them. The crowd wasn't just clapping or cheering. They were crying, calling out words of encouragement, reaching toward them with outstretched hands that held flowers, letters, and small gifts. The atmosphere was unlike anything she had experienced in all her years of royal duties. "Mama, look at all the people," Charlotte whispered in wonder, her small hand tightening in Catherine's as she took in the incredible sight before them. George walked with practiced composure beside his father, waving to the crowd with the natural grace that seemed to come so easily to him. But Catherine could see the way his eyes widened at the sheer scale of the gathering, at the signs bearing his name and pictures of their family, at the obvious love and concern on every face he could see. Louis, true to his spirited nature, seemed delighted by all the attention. He waved enthusiastically at everyone, his infectious smile causing ripples of laughter and joy to spread through sections of the crowd. His innocent happiness provided moments of lightness that everyone desperately needed on such an emotionally heavy day. As they began their slow walk along the designated route, individual voices began to emerge from the general roar of the crowd. "We love you, William," called out an elderly woman near the front, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you for everything," shouted a young man holding a small British flag. But it was the children's voices that hit Catherine the hardest. Young voices calling out to George, Charlotte, and Louis, other children who had been brought by their parents to witness this historic moment. She could see families in the crowd, parents lifting their own children onto their shoulders so they could see better, teaching them about the importance of this day. William moved with quiet dignity beside her, acknowledging the crowd with gentle waves and nods, occasionally stopping to accept flowers or to speak briefly with someone at the barrier. Catherine watched him transform before her eyes into the public figure the nation needed him to be, even as she knew the personal cost of maintaining that composure. A middle-aged woman pressed forward at one point, tears streaming down her face as she extended a small bouquet toward Catherine. "For the children," she said simply, and Catherine accepted the flowers with a grateful smile that she hoped conveyed her appreciation for the gesture. "Thank you," Catherine said softly, her voice barely audible above the crowd noise, but the woman's face lit up with joy at being acknowledged personally by the Duchess. The planned route took them past sections where different groups had gathered. Military veterans stood at attention, their medals catching the sunlight as they saluted William with obvious respect and emotion. A section of healthcare workers, many still wearing their uniforms from night shifts, held signs expressing their support and understanding of the difficult journey ahead. Young families with children the same ages as George, Charlotte and Louis waved enthusiastically, their own children calling out friendly greetings to the royal siblings. Halfway through their walk, they paused at a designated spot where local officials and dignitaries waited to pay their respects. The brief ceremony was formal but heartfelt, with speeches that honored their years of service and their commitment to duty, even in the face of personal challenges. But it was the spontaneous moments that captured hearts around the world. When Louis dropped his small toy airplane and a young boy in the crowd retrieved it and handed it back with a shy smile. When Charlotte received a small bouquet from a girl her own age and impulsively gave the child a hug that made both their mothers cry. When George stopped to shake hands with a young scout, who had clearly prepared for weeks for this moment. Catherine found herself making eye contact with individual faces in the crowd, trying to acknowledge as many people as possible, understanding that for many of them, this might be their only chance to feel personally connected to this moment in history. She saw grandparents who had clearly been waiting for hours, teenagers who had skipped school to be there, young mothers holding babies who would be too young to remember this day, but whose parents would tell them about it for years to come. The emotion in the crowd was palpable and infectious. Catherine felt her own composure being tested as she witnessed the genuine love and concern on face after face. These people hadn't come out of mere curiosity or duty. They had come because this family had touched their lives in some way, had represented something important about stability, tradition, and hope for the future. As they neared the end of their route, Catherine realized that this wasn't just a farewell for their family, but a collective moment of national emotion. The crowd wasn't just saying goodbye to William and Catherine. They were processing their own feelings about change, loss, and the uncertainty of the future. This moment had become bigger than any one family, representing something fundamental about resilience and the power of human connection in the face of difficult circumstances. The final moments arrived far too quickly and yet felt like they had been building for an eternity. As they reached the end of their planned route, Catherine could see the raised platform where William would deliver his farewell address to the nation. The sight of the microphones and cameras waiting there made everything feel suddenly, devastatingly final. The children, despite their young ages, seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. Louis moved closer to Catherine, while Charlotte reached for William's hand. George, with wisdom beyond his 8 years, positioned himself slightly protectively near his younger siblings, his small face serious but brave. William's speech was everything Catherine had expected it to be. Graceful, dignified, and full of gratitude for the years of service they had been privileged to give. His voice carried clearly across the vast crowd, reaching the millions watching around the world through television and internet broadcasts. He spoke of duty fulfilled, of love for the nation and the Commonwealth, of hope for the future despite present challenges. But it was the personal moments woven throughout his formal words that brought tears to eyes everywhere. When he spoke about Catherine, calling her his rock, my partner in everything, the love of my life who has made every day of service a joy rather than a burden. When he mentioned his children, his voice catching slightly as he promised them that their father's love would continue to guide them always. No matter what the future held, Catherine stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on Charlotte's shoulder, watching the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago at university demonstrate once again why she had known from the beginning that he was someone special. Even facing the most difficult circumstances imaginable, he was thinking first of others, of the people he served, of the family he loved. When William finished speaking, the silence that fell over the massive crowd was profound and moving. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, thousands of people stood in respectful quiet, absorbing the weight of what they had just heard. Then slowly the applause began. Not the enthusiastic clapping of a celebration, but the deep, sustained applause of respect and gratitude. The family remained on the platform for several more minutes, waving to different sections of the crowd, trying to acknowledge as many people as possible in these final moments. Catherine could see people in the crowd wiping away tears, holding each other for comfort, raising children higher on their shoulders for one last glimpse of the royal family together. As they finally turned to leave the platform, Catherine felt William's hand slip into hers with a gentle squeeze that conveyed everything words couldn't express. They had done it. They had faced this impossible day with dignity and love, had given their people the goodbye that both the family and the nation needed. Walking back toward the waiting cars, Catherine was struck by the profound silence of the children. Even Louis seemed to understand that something important and final had just occurred. George walked with his head held high, every inch his father's son, while Charlotte stayed close to Catherine's side. The innocence of their childhood had been forever marked by this day, but Catherine felt a fierce pride in how bravely they had handled everything. The car doors closed with soft thuds that seemed to echo with finality. As they began to drive away, Catherine turned back for one last look at the crowd. Thousands of people were still there, many waving, some crying, all of them carrying with them the memory of this extraordinary day. "Are we going home now, Mama?" Louis asked quietly, his small voice cutting through the emotion-heavy silence in the car. Catherine looked at William, seeing in his eyes the same mixture of sadness and hope that she felt in her own heart. Home would be different now. Everything would be different. But they were together, and they had the love of each other and of all those people they were leaving behind. "Yes, darling," Catherine said softly, pulling Louis closer to her side. "We're going home." As the car pulled away from the palace grounds, beginning the journey toward whatever came next in their lives, Catherine allowed herself one moment to look back at everything they were leaving behind. The crowds, the palace, the life they had built and loved and served with everything they had to give. But then she turned forward, toward the future, toward the unknown challenges and possibilities that lay ahead. They had faced this day with love and dignity, and that same love would carry them through whatever came next. The farewell that had shattered a nation had also revealed its incredible strength, its capacity for love, and its commitment to the values that this family had tried to represent. The children fell asleep during the drive, exhausted by the emotion and activity of the day. Catherine and William rode in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined, both lost in their own thoughts about the day behind them and the days ahead. Outside the car windows, the familiar countryside rolled past, beautiful and peaceful and full of promise for whatever tomorrow might bring. In years to come, people would remember this day as a turning point, a moment when a nation came together to say goodbye to something precious while also celebrating the enduring power of love, duty, and human dignity. For William and Catherine, it would always be remembered as the day they discovered just how deeply they had touched the hearts of the people they had been privileged to serve, and how that love would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead in their journey together.